these are the only two middle delt exercises that you need to grow them. Now, both of these exercises are going to be done with cables, so if you don't have access to cables, don't worry. Toward the second half of the video, I'm going to provide free weight options that are just as effective. So exercise number one is the behind the body cable lateral raise. So why is this such a good motion? First things first, it remedies all of the issues that come along with a traditional dumbbell lateral raise. The two biggest issues that I see with the traditional dumbbell lateral raise is that the motion isn't loaded as specifically as it could be relative to the middle delt, meaning that there isn't a ton of load toward the bottom of the range, but there's a ton of load toward the top of the range where the muscle is actually weaker. What we can do with the behind the body cable lateral is we can actually set it up so that it's hardest toward the bottom, where that cable is forming close to a 90-degree angle with the arm when your arm is at your side. So what you're gonna do to set this up is basically stand right in front of a cable that you're gonna put around the height of your butt. What you wanna make sure of when you step in front of it is actually centered behind your body. So if you want, just like line it up with your butt crack, grab it with your hand, and just make sure that when you step forward, you step slightly out to the side so that the cable is actually pulling sort of down into the opposite side rather than just straight back. Now, notice that as I go through the motion, two things are apparent. So the first thing is that the cable is hugging me very, very tightly, so much so in fact that it's actually brushing very, very slightly against my pants. The second thing is that I'm not raising up and out to the side, I'm actually raising in what's called the scapular plane, which is basically just the plane that your shoulder blade sits in. The reason this is important is because this is where the middle delt functions best. Also keep in mind that throughout the range, you're gonna wanna make sure that you keep your palm facing toward the ground throughout the entirety of the motion. Now, you can also set this up at a different height so that you can make it more difficult in different portions of the movement. So something you can do is actually put the cable close to the floor, and the movement will proportionately be harder toward the top. And then after you fail within that top end of the range, what you can do is you can raise the cable and make it proportionately harder toward the bottom. This provides a really, really good exercise for the middle delt because you're training it through all portions of its range. Now, you can also set this up bilaterally, meaning two arms at the same time, but it is a little bit more annoying. And if you have a fixed cable stack like the one I'm showing, sometimes it can be a little bit wonky to set up. But if you do want to set it up and you can figure out a way to make it comfortable for you, what I'd suggest is actually facing the cable stack first, grabbing the left cable with your left hand, grabbing the right cable with your right hand, and then stepping over one of the cables like a little twisty maneuver so that the cables cross over when you turn around. And from there, basically all of the other things are the same. You're raising your arms up and forward in the scapular plane, you're keeping your palm toward the ground, and proportionately you're loading your arm just as much in the bottom as you are in the top in terms of matching strength profile to resistance profile. Now, if you don't have access to cables, don't worry. Again, we're gonna go over a dumbbell variant specifically for this one later in the video. All right, exercise number two is the cable Y raise. Now, because we loaded the most fully lengthened position in the first exercise, what we're gonna wanna do is load the middle delt in a fully shortened position to make sure that we cover the entirety of the contractile range. Now, although the first variation will be more specific to the middle delt relative to the front and back delts, the second variation will include a little bit more of the front, back, and middle delts. This is because all the delts to some degree function in taking the arm up and overhead. So what you're gonna wanna do for this exercise is step slightly to the side of the cable. I actually like to put my hand up against the cable stack for support. Line up so that when your hand is basically coming down and across your body, you're almost contracting your lower pec, and also so that the cable is basically forming a 90-degree angle from your forearm and your arm in the bottom of the range, much like the first exercise. This makes it proportionately harder in the bottom where you're stronger, and the cable comes closer to your body as you get weaker toward the top. Make sure that when you raise up and out, you're basically raising in the exact direction parallel to the cable. Oftentimes what you'll see is you'll see people raising up and out, and the cable is either coming too far down toward their feet or too far up across their face. You wanna make sure again that that cable is nice and parallel to your arm. Now again, you could do this two arms at the same time, but you might run into similar issues as I mentioned in the first exercise. But if you do wanna set it up two arms at once, what you can do is just reverse action what you did with the first exercise. So instead of facing toward the cable stack and grabbing the handles first, what you'll do is face away from the cable stack and do the same sort of shimmy, twisty thing, except now you're facing toward the cable stack. Now notice that because this is a little bit of a wider stack and I can't actually move the cables super close together, I have to match my arm path a little bit differently so that I'm not coming up as vertically and a little bit more horizontally, again, to make sure that that cable stays nice and parallel to my arm path. Now, what if you don't have access to cables? What can you do instead? So to replace the first exercise, what I would do is I would set up an incline bench and do an incline dumbbell lateral raise where you're still getting some loading in the bottom of the range. Again, if you're doing a standing traditional dumbbell lateral, there's not really any load provided to the shoulder, at least to the middle delt, in the bottom portion of the range. So what we want to do is lean back to a good degree, allow yourself to sort of find your range of mobility by doing it without weights first, and then just basically match the same arm path that we went over in the cable lateral, but now with dumbbells instead. Again, you're raising up and forward in that scap scapular plane slightly out to the side and keeping your palms toward the ground the entire time. If you want to replace the second exercise, and again, all you have access to is dumbbells and maybe a bench, what we can do is a chest supported Y raise where we're leaning up against the bench, chest on the bench, and we're raising up and out a little bit more overhead like we did in that second variant. Now the dumbbell resistance profiles won't be as ideal as the cable resistance profiles, but they'll be good enough to where you'll probably get a very similar effect in terms of training stimulus. Now, although you don't want to toss the dumbbells up and sort of just let them float, we want to initiate with a little bit harder of a contraction toward the bottom in a controlled way so that we can make the bottom of the movement proportionately harder as compared to the top. Remember that you're going to be much weaker toward the top and the weights are getting heavier and heavier as you raise your arms. And so a little help there is probably a good thing in terms of just trying to match the resistance profile as best we can to our strength levels. If you like this video, please share it with your friends. It really, really helps. And please let me know in the comments which muscle group you want me to talk about next.